Single pilot in a light twin is a thrilling experience. If you own the plane, it's freedom personified. It's also dangerous, but only if certain things go wrong. If the engines are turbo, you'll excuse yourself for feeling nearly invulnerable. Single engine service ceiling of 17,000 feet. An airport like Santa Fe is intimidating to some, 6,300 feet above sea level. In July, it exceeds ISA by a margin. Call it a 9,000 foot density altitude, the altitude that the airplane thinks it's at when it's 82 degrees Fahrenheit at 6,300 feet. 15 degrees Celsius is 59 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also the standard temperature at sea level. Subtract 2 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 feet of altitude, and at 6,300 feet, the standard temperature is hovering a bit over freezing. The temperature in Santa Fe that day was ISA plus 25 degrees. This thing, ISA, International Standard Atmosphere, is what engineers use when they build aircraft components. Airplanes are designed to function, generally, up to ISA plus 35. At sea level, that's a max temperature of 50 Celsius or 122 Fahrenheit. Some airframes go to plus 38 to survive Death Valley or Egypt. Aircraft engines produce less horsepower when either temperature or altitude increases. Add the two of them together, and a high-performing hot rod in Los Angeles becomes a pig in Santa Fe. It's one of the reasons why they came up with a thing called turbo normalization. You compress air, cool it a bit, and shove it into a cylinder, and the engine ignores the performance-robbing penalties of density altitude. That means that 300 horsepower per side in LA is still 300 per side in Santa Fe. If it's a twin piston with a turbo, it's probably some variant of Continental's TSIO 520. There's a reason why. It's a good engine. The turbo version of the Cessna 310 is capable of single-engine climb to 17,000 feet density altitude. It's not because the motor loses power. The critical altitude, where a turbo-normalized piston ceases to make its max-rated power, is another mile above the single-engine service ceiling. But power isn't the only thing that limits aircraft performance. Lift does as well. And the bite of the propeller through air is less efficient up high, meaning that more power is robbed turning the propeller faster in order to move the same mass of atmosphere, of which the equal and opposite reaction is thrust. So even though a turbo-normalized engine produces the same power at 9,000 foot density altitude as it does at sea level, it also needs more speed in order to produce the necessary lift for the 2-ton aircraft to fly. That means it robs more power, and the propeller is less efficient, robs more power still. All this means that the single-engine climb rate of 390 feet per minute at sea level isn't what you'll get at 9,000 feet on a standard day, or 6,300 feet at ISA plus 25. The extrapolation isn't quite linear, but at 17,000 feet the climb rate drops to 50 feet per minute even though the engine is still making full rated power. Call it a touch over 200 feet per minute for a morning takeoff from Santa Fe in the middle of July. If you're climbing at the best rate single-engine speed, you're doing 106 nautical miles per hour. Call it 1.8 miles per minute. At a touch over 200 feet a minute, call it 120 feet of altitude per mile across the ground. It's not much. On this particular morning, the aircraft experienced a loss of engine power, but it didn't climb. It entered a turn consistent with an attempt to return to the airport, descended, and crashed into a house where it burst into flames. Here's where knowing a little something about lift vectors and math comes into play. A normal bank angle in an aircraft is 30 degrees. At that bank angle, the pilot is robbing the vertical component of lift, which keeps the aircraft aloft, for a horizontal component, which turns the aircraft. At 30 degrees, the vertical component of lift is 87% of what it is with the wings level. If you're in a 5,000-pound aircraft, you're losing 670 pounds in the vertical component. Gravity doesn't change just because you're in a turn, so you begin to descend. When all things are going right, you increase pitch to produce 5,773 pounds of total lift, of which 5,000 goes vertical to balance gravity. You have to get pretty deep into the math to figure out how much horsepower it takes to produce another 773 pounds of lift, but it doesn't look like the Cessna had the power for it. The ADS-B data depicts the initiation of a left-hand turn a minute after the aircraft departed the airfield. The aircraft leveled off around 100 feet above field level. It maintained a fairly consistent 100 knots ground speed. In still air, this would equate, at 6,500 feet, to 88 knots airspeed. It may have been less than this. The aircraft was heading south. The winds on the field were out of the north at 4 knots. Minimum controllable airspeed for single-engine operation on the Turbo 310 is 80 knots. The pilot appears to have been nibbling with VMC, which is understandable as the aircraft wasn't climbing. Yet he maintained a consistent airspeed until the final moments of the flight, when the aircraft suddenly entered a steep descent while ground speed decreased. The descent lasted only 200 feet. Witnesses recalled the aircraft was in a nose-down spiral during that time, a classic VMC roll. Why didn't it climb? 200 feet per minute is not much, but in a few minutes worth of it would have given the pilot the altitude he needed to maneuver for a return to the airport. Maybe the pilot failed to complete the immediate action items associated with an engine failure during takeoff, namely feathering the propeller on the failed engine. A little more drag and 200 feet per minute becomes nothing, or worse yet, negative. VYSC, the best rate of climb single engine, is 106 knots. Best angle of climb is around 100. Anything lower than this only serves to reduce performance. And then you have the terrain. Mountains peak not far from the airport. Downdrafts are sometimes a reality in the foothills. 200 feet per minute isn't an awful lot, even for a downdraft. Maybe fate was against him. God bless. For a more detailed discussion, click the link. Until next time.
Twin says 5-1 Charlie, runway 20, right turns approved, clear for takeoff, wind's gone.
Clear for takeoff, 5-1 Charlie, thanks for help. 5-1 Charlie's got an engine failure.
And say again?
5-1 Charlie's got an engine failure.
5-1 Charlie, Roger, you make the left turn to runway 33?
Roger, 5-1 Charlie.
5-1 Charlie, you're clear to land any runway you want, winds are calm.
5-1 Charlie, I'm going to get some altitude.
Alright. 5-1 Charlie, runway 33 is just off your left side. That might be the closest one for you. 2-8's a little bit further to the north, but your choice. The crash rescue 1 appears the aircraft is down, but well off the field, about 2 miles off the approach end.